right, sir. It's been a long day. Let's hit it. It's also been one incredible week. Welcome back, Niger Innis, Chairman of Congress, the Congress of Racial Equality.
It is my pleasure to be with you, Tanya, as always. You didn't beat me up too badly the first time, so I thought I'd come back.
Okay, yeah. I can't promise that this time. We'll see what happens.
I'm strapped. I'm ready.
There's been so much going on. Let's just kind of jump into, I want to, just in case we kind of get into a back and forth and start running out of time or something. I just want to hit like the major news right off the top of the bat. And, for at least for people who are left of center, the big story in the last couple of days has been, the win in Wisconsin for someone who has not even run statewide before.
Right.
After,
You're talking about the judicial
Crawford.
candidate. Yep.
Yes, Crawford, after Elon Musk spent about $25 million. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I like to look at yesterday's election day as a split decision. Obviously, the liberals won in Wisconsin. I think she ended up getting 54%. And that is definitely a rebuke of the money that Elon Musk put into the campaign. Although I salute Elon Musk. I salute him for putting his money where his mouth is. He's backing it up. And quite frankly, T, he's our own George Soros. You guys have George Soros who spends, and I'll get, even though I think he's the devil, give the devil his due because he has an ideology and he puts his money behind that ideology. And, some would say that the Koch brothers kind of filled that role.
I was going to say, you guys had the Koch brothers long before Elon came along. So we don't want to hear that.
But you know this, the Kochs are very libertarian oriented. They're not Republican as much as they are libertarian. And sometimes libertarians and Republicans have different points of view. But no, I love the Koch brothers and what they do for the movement, generally speaking, but they're not exactly the same as Soros. I mean, Soros put a network of candidates.
Okay, let me stop you here. We're not going into Soros. Right now, we're going to talk about $25 million. Elon Musk is trying to buy up elections.
Let me step back.
It didn't work in Wisconsin.
Step back to Wisconsin, okay? Even though I readily admit, obviously, the numbers show that his investment did not get a big enough return on his investment. And Wisconsin is a damn important state. It is one of the eternal battleground states, has been since the 1980s, which is going back Republican, Democrat, Democrat, Republican. So it's a major defeat. But the reason I call yesterday's election a split decision is because you also had Democrats that outraised Republicans in 2 congressional races in Florida and ended up getting whipped in both of those races, even though the Republicans...
Let's say they got whipped. They definitely lost.
Yeah.
But Democrats made inroads in races that have been ridiculously overwhelmingly Republican.
But the problem is, I think it yet again reflects what used to be a battleground state, certainly when we were in Georgetown together, all the way until the Trump ascendancy. Florida was an absolute battleground. Obama won Florida twice, okay?
Right.
Florida was truly a battleground state. And I think what these elections, even though the Republicans were dramatically outspent and found a way to have victories, it shows how much this former battleground state is no longer a battleground state. From the state legislature.
Fair enough. I think that most people would say that Florida is solidly Republican now. Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't hurt for your side that's the residence of the president. So
It helps.
Right.
Indeed. Although I'll note that the president, nor Musk, unlike Wisconsin, where Musk went there personally and actively campaigned, in addition to I didn't know, by the way, it was 25 million. I thought it was 10 million. But whatever it is, it was a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, it was.
He not only backed up his words and his endorsement with cash, but he did it with personal engagement on behalf of the candidate. And he lost, but at the same time, so he didn't do that in Florida. Even Trump, who lives in Florida, didn't campaign with the congressional candidates. He just tweeted socially, so it shows how strong Florida is. And that is critical because, in fact, I might argue that when
Well, there's nobody's arguing about Democrats taking over Florida again. So let's not even go there for the
well,
filibuster.
I'm just going to wrap up here, and that's this:
Okay.
that the congressional majority that Speaker Johnson has was so slim, Republicans were terrified. We lose one of these seats, and we got maybe a 3-seat majority, a 2-seat majority. That's no
Yes.
majority at all. But now we
It's
are
not.
up to 7-seat majority, which isn't spectacular either, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was before Tuesday.
Not with the caucus that you guys have that, are not all that thrilled about some of the economic choices. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, though, speaking of personal engagement, thoughts on Cory Booker breaking the segregationist Strom Thurmond's record last night?
Well, there is some poetic justice there, is it not? They were both
Yes.
good Democrats, by the way, just for the record. Strom and Cory.
Yeah, until the civil rights came along, and then all the Democrats became Republicans,
well,
right? They switched.
well, yeah, we can debate that, but in any case, no doubt that Cory did a historic thing, following what Rand Paul did several years ago, what Ted Cruz did. I mean, the classic. You remember this from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The classic filibusters and it actually collapsing on the Senate floor, which Jimmy Stewart did in that wonderful movie. That's been lost. That art of filibustering for you to make the people know what your passion is and why they should be in favor of that endeavor. I applaud Cory. I actually, believe it or not, I actually know Cory. We're actually friendly with one another. We tried not to talk
Mhm.
politics,
Yeah, I bet. I
but he's
bet.
actually debated him a couple of times, and he's a formidable debater. He's a formidable
Yes.
speaker. And the question that I have, for you, that leans center left, if you will,
Hmm.
is Cory going to make a better candidate for president in 2028 than he was in 2024?
Time will tell, but it certainly looks like he's grabbing the reins of leader of the Democratic Party right now. It seems like. We'll see.
And there is a tremendous void, as you know. And the leader of the party is going to be one. I mean, you said we have our own problems in the Republican Party in terms of those, dogged
Fiscal
libertarians
conservatives.
versus conservatives, and that's a divide that Trump has kind of healed a little bit, but it still exists. Well, you guys on the left are going to have to deal with the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders on one side, and Fetterman, senator out of Pennsylvania, who I actually am quite fond of, on the other side, centrist
That's
orientated Democrat.
always been the case. That's always been the case. I mean, at least for the last 20 years, it's been the progressives versus the moderates. So that's certainly nothing new. Absolutely.
And so, to the degree that Cory or whomever who steps into that void, because I don't think Schumer is. In fact, I hear that
Yeah.
AOC may even challenge him and primary him for his Senate seat in a few years, which I would just
Another
love.
time will tell.
I
Yeah.
would get out.
Yeah.
I would get out the popcorn and get a glass of Chablis and
I'm
enjoy
sure you
myself.
will. I'm sure you will. Yeah. And of course, another big story of the week, the tariffs.
Yes.
Like tariffs for the most part, I mean, it's a gamble. We'll see what happens. Right now, there seems to be there are a lot of people who think there's more of a likelihood that life has just gotten more expensive for probably everyone in the Western world. But it's the auto industry tariffs that I'm most curious about because there are a lot of people who own car dealerships in the Midwest. One was interviewed, I know, by NBC earlier this week. He's been in business for 28 years. The guy says that it's an international business. Like even the cars that are put together in America still have parts that are made somewhere else. So no
Sure.
matter how you slice it, everybody's car price is going up. And I wonder if Republicans are happy that this is the particular choice that the president's made.
Well, it's a very interesting thing. There's a way that one commentator put it, which I thought was brilliant. And he said, what Trump is doing is no doubt he's going to create a temporary disruption. But the long term goal is to reorganize the global economic order that is a lot more balanced and fair for Americans and American manufacturers.
Right. That's the plan.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Okay. And we're all going to be, bated breath to see that it's successful. But
this is a country that does not like waiting.
true,
I mean, it's an instant gratification society.
we are.
If you have a bunch of people whose price, I mean, the man talked about he was going to bring prices down on day one.
And he has
If
on
prices
eggs. You
start to
notice
go
eggs
off,
have been cut down. The price of eggs has gone down.
yeah, and then the car is going to go up $8,000. So I'm just saying, if the cost of living gets higher, surely somebody in the Republican caucus is going to be like, Mr. President, help us out here because we're going to lose seats in
Look,
Congress.
and look, the tale will be told by the off-year elections, which are coming up next year. Trump's economic policy is going to be on the ballot.
Right. Well, it will start this November, actually. I mean, we always have Jersey and Virginia?
Yeah, that's right. The governor races. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to learn something, even though I kind of put Jersey in a deep blue territory, and Virginia is almost like Florida in that at one time it was definitely a battleground state, but less so today than it used to be.
Getting more purple.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd say bluish purple, whatever that combination makes,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But to your right. I mean, what I find really interesting is to step back from this and just look at it from a political scientist point of view. The Trump tariff strategy, frankly, it has shades of labor and Democrat protectionist agenda. I mean, the Bernie Sanders protectionist wing of the Democratic Party still exists. And so it's fascinating that you almost have a little switcheroo where Trump has remade the Republican Party into a working class, middle class party. The old bushy country club
sound
Republicans.
Like it is, but that's not.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, the old.
So he might have made it. He might have convinced people. He might have made it sound like it is, but that's different than it actually being so. Because if you're busy,
I think if you look at the voters reflect the party, and I think we got a tremendous amount of voters from working class, not just from working class whites, but working class Hispanics, and tremendous growth with working class African American men. So
Niger, all that means is that they believed him. That doesn't mean it's true. Because right now, how many jobs have been lost since Doge came in? And, there are veterans losing their jobs left and right who are complaining, who voted for him and are complaining.
Well,
so
I'm going to talk
the idea that he's this great working class president is ridiculous.
Well, I don't know that you can look at a government bureaucrat and say that is a reflection of Joe Sixpack in Middle America. I mean,
that's not fair because there are a lot of veterans. No. There are a lot of veterans who are not a government bureaucrat at all. At all.
No, look.
They come out of the service and they want to keep serving, and a lot of them go to work for the VA. And, and a lot of these people are losing their jobs. And then you're going to talk about the 10,000 people. It's actually 20,000 total. Half of them actually decided to take retirement and leave early, but 10,000 were fired from HHS, for God's sake. I mean, if you're endangering healthcare, Medicaid payments, Social Security, and at the same time that you're claiming that you're a working class president, I'm missing how these two things go together. Help me out here.
The thing is, when you have a federal government that under Democrats and Republicans, on record, according to the Government Accounting Office, lost up to $500 million every year, then there's certainly some room for reform. And that's the reform that is taking place right now. And, I actually believe that the change in parties is quite legitimate, because if you look at the number of working class, they used to call them Reagan Democrats. Before then, they called them Nixon Democrats, and they certainly supported Bush in 2004 and 2000. You have a situation now where in the suburbs, which used to be solid Republican, okay, and you had upper middle class, solid Republican areas, a lot of those folk, for social reasons, abortion being really big one, have moved over to the Democrats. At the same time, the guy, the blue collar guy who rolls up and girl that roll up their hands and get their fingernails dirty have switched dramatically over the last 20 years from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party.
Part of that has to do with the fact that the Democrats have screwed up in their own representation.
You won't get
in
any
their
pushback from
messaging
me.
and looking like they have abandoned the working class. I grant you all that. None of that still means that Republicans are suddenly working class proponent.
What
None of that means that.
I think, and it's funny we talk about.
And you know what's going to prove it? The big ass tax cut for billionaires. That's what's going to prove how not working class this administration
The way
is.
tax cuts work is you cut taxes for people who pay taxes, okay? And the reality is that so-called upper elite pays the lion's share of federal taxes. So when you want to give some degree of tax relief, you're not going to get tax relief to somebody who doesn't pay any taxes.
Are you really actually making an excuse for giving billionaires a tax cut?
I'm saying that if you're going to do an across-the-board tax cut, yes, you're going to include billionaires in that tax cut. What I say,
but don't do an across-the-board tax cut.
No, but what I would say in terms of taxes is what we need to do, and I know you supported this because you are thrilled. And I'm going to get you in trouble with some of your colleagues by talking about this, but you were thrilled with Paul Ryan when Mitt Romney picked Paul Ryan because you said it looks like
it was like, you know, the grown up in the room in Congress at the time. Yes,
right.
Go ahead.
Okay, and one of his big proposals is what we want to do is yes, we want to get tax relief, but we want to destroy and iron out the loophole. Okay. And that's my philosophy too, because the fact of the matter is the billionaires, the uber rich, don't worry about taxes because they've got the lawyers. Okay. They've got the lobbyists to make the tax law the way it is. Who does a high tax regime hurt more than anybody? I would not argue the billionaires. I would argue those who want to climb the economic ladder, those who might want to be billionaires.
Then why do they need another one? And why are they thrilled at the idea of getting another one with this president?
I think the question
they don't care.
I think that we have to ask is, okay, this tax regime, which existed under Biden and obviously was started by Trump, okay, is due to expire. So what we need to ask is this question, two questions. Question number one, has revenue to the federal government really gone so down that the federal government has to get on the street corner with a tin can and say, please give me more money? So that's one question, okay? And then question number two is the problem, and this goes even for President Trump during his first administration that he's trying to correct with Doge, is that spending never goes down. Okay, so the question is, did the tax cut, which now we've got empirical evidence, okay? It's not Tanya's opinion versus Niger's opinion, it's facts. We have empirical evidence, and I would argue, and I will admit, I haven't seen the paperwork or this reflected in paper, but I would argue that revenue has not decreased dramatically of the federal government, or some would say the Leviathan that is the federal government, from the time Trump's tax cuts went into place than before Trump, during the Obama administration and during the last years of the Bush administration. The fact of the matter is, government does not have a feeding problem. It has a spending problem. And that's what Trump is trying to address.
Yeah, okay. I'm missing how he addresses that with a tax cut, but I don't want to go back over this again.
Grover Norquist, I'll just a little joke. Grover Norquist said,
God, don't even give me Grover Norquist.
But give him this. He's colorful with words. He says, government should be small enough that you can strangle it in the bathtub. And I think by giving a tax cut.
Here's the problem, Niger. The overwhelming amount of money being spent by the federal government is spent on Social Security.
Entitlements, yes.
And, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Department of Defense.
Yep.
It's spent on the four things that nobody wants to cut.
Right. Republicans don't want to touch the Department of Defense, and Democrats don't want to touch entitlement. No, no, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
I would say most Republicans don't want to touch entitlement because you know what? There are a whole lot of, Republican Trump voters whose
Particularly
moms
in
and
Florida.
dads get Social Security,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure,
And Medicaid.
sure.
I
But
mean,
look, you remember when we were growing up, okay, and there were polls taken for our generation when we were 20 somethings and early 30 somethings. Do you believe what is more believable? That when you retire, you're going to get Social Security benefits? Or do you believe in Martians from outer space? And by overwhelming majorities, we believe Martians from outer space, as opposed to that we're going to actually get our retirement. Look, the reality is
we can hope.
Social Security was a noble agenda of FDR, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But at the time that it was started, there were 4 workers for every retiree. So it was solvent. It had money. Okay. There was plenty of solvency in the Social Security Trust Fund. Tragically, that is no longer the case. We are now, I think, 1-to-1 or worse, And so the question comes, at some point, we've got, unless we want to go bankrupt as a country and go the way of the British Empire, go the way of the Spanish Empire and the Roman Empire, and just go broke, then we're going to have to be daring and touch that third rail.
But be careful in how we do it. I mean, anyway, the indiscriminate nature I think, is most people's problem with trying to pare down the federal government. It seems rather indiscriminate right now, which we talked about.
One thing I will agree upon is that mistakes have been made. The good thing about Musk and Doge and Trump, all under Trump's leadership, is that when mistakes are made and they acknowledge those mistakes, they do reverse them in many cases. Maybe not all, but in many cases.
Well, that's a great transition.
I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's coming.
You know it's coming, right?
I got my seatbelt on, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Abrego Garcia?
Yeah, go ahead.
The immigrant, the El Salvadoran who is here legally, who's married to an American, that the Trump administration admitted in court was an administrative error, that they sent this poor man to this El Salvadoran prison, and now they won't go get him back.
Well,
about correcting this mistake.
From what I understand,
hell is going on?
What I understand, this individual, I'm hoping I'm not wrong here. If I am, I'll come on the next broadcast and admit that I was wrong. But what I've heard, and I really literally just heard this 2 or 3 hours ago, is that when you examine this man's past, he does have some degree of a criminal record. Okay, so you're shaking your head no.
Unless that broke today, that's not true. Well, my understanding is that the federal government had an informant that said he was a member of MS-13, but they were never able to adjudicate that. There was never any proof of that, which was exactly why he was given the legal status. That's why they let him stay.
Right.
That's why they said it was a mistake that they sent him. So somebody needs to go get this man.
Well, look, if what I just said is wrong, and everything you said in reference to the man is correct, then I agree with you. Then they are abusing someone that is here in the country legally and should never have been deported in the first place. But you'll notice I put a little clause before it, which is that everything I
understand. It's a disclaimer.
No,
right. Understand.
But look, I actually think this issue is going to work out against you guys, because the American people support the immigration policy of Trump, which is trying to correct the disastrous immigration performance of President Biden, where for a period of time, it was essentially just an open border and an invitation, to those who want to break the law by coming into the country illegally to do so. And so
there is no doubt that immigration played an enormous part in the re-election of Donald Trump. No doubt about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and also,
but hang on a second, Niger.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot, how is one a supporter of the U.S. Constitution and not having any problem, no matter how much you want to change, the current state of immigration in the country, with what is, on its face at least, just a complete running over of due process or ignoring it entirely? I asked you last time if you thought that Donald Trump was going to adhere to court orders, and you said that you thought he would. And you weren't all that convincing, to be honest with you. But in some of these, the whole idea of like sending people off or not turning the planes around when a judge has said, turn the planes around. Let's just start there. Do you still feel like that he is actually adhering to court orders?
Well, first of all, you have a judge that is a low tier judge with a local district that is trying to make immigration law and interfere with the powers of the executive branch and executing an agenda that the president of the United States wants to put forward.
Niger, it is the federal judicial system that you start in the district court in the jurisdiction.
But the beauty of our separation of powers is that the legislative, the executive, and judicial branch have checks on each other. And one of the checks that Congress has over these lower judgeships is to eliminate them. And right now, Johnson, because of this particular one local federal judge, okay, because of the decision that he's making in obstructing Trump and Homeland Security for fulfilling its immigration agenda, Johnson is thinking of reorganizing and, quite frankly, firing a number of these judges. And I support review and by the way, that's all under the frame of constitutional legitimacy. Okay. That is his.
Okay, well, John Roberts came out and said you can't just be like, let's get rid of the judges because you don't agree with the decision. There is an entire appellate process for that. And you know that, right?
Yes. And what
and you're not actually answering my question. My question is, do you think it's all right that they didn't turn the planes around? Because it seems to me like somebody decided that they didn't care about a court order.
Well, I'll tell you this much, T. If that plane is filled with a bunch of gang-banging criminals, or overwhelmingly filled with a bunch of gang-bang criminals that are part of these transnational narco-terrorist organizations, then you're damn right the president has a responsibility. First and foremost is the defense of the American people. And these people, most of whom are illegal, are clear and present dangers. So no, you should not have turned the plane around. Now, if there's some cases...
The process doesn't matter.
No, I think if there are some isolated cases where, like this gentleman that you just mentioned before, I forget his name, but the gentleman you mentioned before, if there's some isolated cases of those individuals, okay, like that should never have been on that plane in the first place, no question, we need to go down there, bring them back to the United States. Not only bring them back to the United States, but quite frankly, pay some compensatory redress of what happened to them. But the overwhelming majority of these people are hardened criminals that were not only here in the country illegally, but had the temerity to break American laws while they were here.
Niger, our system of justice, correct me if I'm wrong, has always been that you are innocent until proven guilty. Are you not at all disturbed that seems to have been turned on its head?
Well, I want to examine what process, I think his name is Holman, John Holman, the director, what there was some type of
Holman?
I'm sorry?
You're talking about the czar, the border czar?
Exactly, okay? There's some type of process that took place under his office with the jurisdiction and overview of Director Nome, okay, Homeland Security Director, cabinet position. There's some type of process that came to fruition that identified these people, found these people.
Checklist.
Yeah. So whatever that process is, the question is that process constitution and under the framework of the executive branch's power? And look, this judge made his position known. Okay. It is going to be appealed. And I hope it's appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court makes it a final determinative decision on what the limits are of executive power and what the limits are on the judiciary interfering with the executive power of branches, in particular, the most important power of a president of the United States, which is to protect the homeland from dangers that are foreign and domestic.
Yeah, true. But you don't get to break the law in order to defend the country.
We'll find out if it truly was unconstitutional and breaking the law. I think when it's appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. One thing for sure, and what's a blessing for our country.
Hang on a second. But here's my next question then. What happens if the court actually says it was unconstitutional? You still got these people in a prison that we can't get them out of, right?
No,
like, what's the recourse?
No. I think that if it is ruled unconstitutional, and it is also ruled that with deliberate speed, we need to bring these people back to the country, which I'm not so sure that both are necessarily going to come through. I mean, you could have a situation where they say what the president did was unconstitutional, but because these people are clear and present dangers to the domestic tranquility of the United States, we're going to let it stand. So essentially a slap on the wrist, okay? Which, by the way, occurred with Lincoln. It occurred with FDR and his policy in turning Japanese Americans, okay?
Yeah, and we had to pay a whole lot of money for that, didn't we?
Right. You know, so, I mean, the beauty of our country, T, is that we are, at the end of the day, we are a rule of law, not of men and women.
We're supposed to be. That's my point.
And at the end of the day, I think that the Supreme Court, you know, is going to have a final say on what are the limits of executive power.
Yeah. I encourage you to check out the 8-point checklist. It was in one of the recent filings in court that the judge asked for.
You think it's a weak
kind
list?
Of scary that just, you know, tattoos and stuff that you see on social media. I mean, if you read through this, some of these criteria are just if you had a conversation with somebody that is a known gang member. I mean, come on.
Right. Well, look, I actually believe that on a case-by-case basis, you're going to find the overwhelming majority of these individuals were just, even if Trump or the czar went over the line, that they were right in doing so at the end of the day. I don't like to make the argument the ends justify the means, but the courts may indeed do that when they see that some of these guys, or most of these guys and gals, are violent offenders that have broken not one but several American laws. And in the case where we're wrong, in the case that we're wrong, and we swept up some decent people that did not break the law, that were not part of gangs, that were here legally or supposed to be here legally, then not only do we need to bring them back, but we need to make restitution to them as well and make them whole.
Heard. On the same subject, but now let's switch it over to student visas. What is Rubio doing? I mean, where is he even getting the list of people that he's deporting? Do you have any idea?
I do. There are a number of nonprofit watchdog organizations that have compiled lists.
Is it Canary Mission? Is that one of them?
It probably is. I haven't heard of those guys, but I'm sure that they're one of the guys as well.
Don't you think? Because all it takes for these watchdogs is to have somebody that doesn't like you report you.
There's always, look, with lists and with mankind being in charge of lists, we don't have AI for that just yet. You know, there's always going to be potential for incompetence, for a personal bias, okay, and for other maladies of mankind and womankind, okay? So, yes, there's always...
You don't think that should be corrected, like, immediately? I mean...
Again, I think this struggle that we're going through right now is a healthy struggle, a healthy process, okay? Because I think at the end of the day, the courts, in particular the Supreme Court, is going to say, this list, Czar Holman, is not credible enough, okay? It needs to be strengthened. You need to have a little bit higher bar than you do right now. Right. That's possible. It's also possible to say,
yeah, but hang on a second. I'm even off the DHS ICE thing, because right now it's the student visas. Because yet again, we're talking about a challenge to the Constitution. It's First Amendment rights, for God's sake. This poor woman was a co-author of an op-ed, and now she's in an ICE detention center in Louisiana.
Well, the question is she in that ICE detention center simply? Well, first of all, I'm going to read the op-ed, okay, because You do not have
I read the op-ed.
you do
It's
not.
about as mild as it gets.
Okay, fair enough. And I trust your judgment. If it was just the op-ed, then maybe something was wrong in this case. But the fact is that you do not have a right given by God to be given a student visa. Okay. It is
True.
not a right. It is a privilege.
It's true, but
We're the
hers was an
only-
F1.
We're the only.
And that comes with constitutional rights. That means that the student gets the same constitutional rights that we do. And that includes the freedom of speech.
But if the student committed perjury when they were applying for the student visa in the first place, then no, they should never receive that student visa. It should be revoked and they should be deported. The fact of the matter is, again, that falls within the realm of the most important executive power that a president has, which is to protect the homeland. And no, you do not have the right to come into the country and be anti-black, be anti-Semitic, to desire the overthrow of the American government. It's on the form. When you fill out a form to be a student visa or a permanent resident, they ask you these questions.
Yeah, but do you really think, I mean, it's really rather tantamount to all the anti-apartheid divestment protests that took place when we were in college. I mean, do you really consider it, if you are in favor of not having Gaza leveled, that means that you're giving support to terrorism?
No, you're not necessarily. But if you are supportive of Hamas, which is not only a governmental entity, but a terrorist entity that was recognized as a terrorist entity under Trump, under Biden, under Trump before him, and under Obama before him. Okay.
Right.
So to the degree to which you are manifesting some Hamas agenda, or you have ties to Hamas, then yes, you are a clear and present danger to the United States, and you should never have been allowed to come in the first place.
You don't think that needs to be proven?
I do. Yes, I think that needs to be proven.
Okay. All right, cool. Let me move on. Last time we talked about the attack on DEI.
Yes.
And now that includes removing from the Arlington Cemetery website the notable people of color and women who've served this country.
There's no spin here.
Should Republicans be fighting back against this or what?
It's a freaking disaster. I have complained about it, and other
Glad
Republicans,
to hear that.
Other Republicans should be complaining about it. Other Americans, period. I think Jackie Robinson was removed from some entity of some sort. That is outrageous.
Oh, for God's sake.
That is an absolute, utter disgrace, and is wrong and should be corrected immediately. Having said that, I am, you know this, because I said it last time, I'm generally in favor of dramatic reform and in many cases ending of DEI programs, because quite frankly, even though the face of DEI is yours or mine, the reality is the biggest beneficiaries of DEI over the years have been white women. Okay?
Yes.
It is a trickle down social policy. You liberals don't like trickle down economics. You shouldn't like trickle down social policy either, which is that it benefits the elites, and you hope that some of the benefits.
Start with the you liberals, man. My kid calls me conservative, for God's sake.
No, you're
My kid thinks that everybody who's moderate is conservative. So hang on.
I'll admit that you are a centrist, and actually you embrace some classical liberal ideas and endeavors. You know, so that's to your credit. But
it's the daughter of a Marine can only be so liberal.
God bless him and you for recognizing it.
Tell me something though. Speaking of which, the whole still on the DEI. I mean, what is with this week's? Was it this week? All the days run together. The executive order about rewriting history that seemed to specifically attack the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Yeah.
What is going on?
Well, I got to tell you, T, I was involved in the very, very beginning of the African American Museum. One, because they came to us and asked permission to use core as part of their civil rights demonstrations. Okay, not demonstrations, but entities that they have within the museum. And of course, I gave them permission and a salute. I was there. I was blessed enough to be with then the chief of staff of the White House. Well, actually, he was a Democrat under Trump, the first chief of staff, and I think the longest serving chief of staff. He's a good man. Okay, he was there. Several administration officials as we got a VIP tour of the museum.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter, and I know some of the people that served on that board or do serve on that board. And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, just like many in academia and many in media tend to lean left of center, the folk at the
Mm-hmm.
museum did too. And just to give you, there are several examples, but just to give you one example, the museum had a display of Anita Hill. But they had
Okay.
absolutely no mention, no display of the second African American justice of the United States Supreme Court, a guy named Clarence Thomas. And so, again, I don't care where you're coming from on the ideological spectrum, you got to recognize that there's something immoral and unholy about doing this.
Okay. I
And
wouldn't
so
go
that's just one
unholy is a bit much.
example of the leftist drift of many on that board of the African American Museum. And so,
Okay, let's for the sake of you know what that I understand what you're saying. Why rewrite history because of that? Why not just put something in the museum of Clarence Thomas?
well, what I would say is what, again, what do they say? When you make an omelet, you've got to break some eggs. And I think that's what's going on here. I think they're saying, hey, we're going to put a halt on the status quo. And I do believe that they're going to be folk within the administration. I know some of the folk in the administration. I know that they're going to not want a complete void within the African American Museum. What they're going to want is just a little bit more fairness and ideological balance. Yes, you should talk about Thurgood Marshall, but you should also talk about Justice Clarence Thomas. Yes, you should talk about W.E.B. Du Bois, but you should also talk about Marcus Garvey. You should also talk about Booker T. Washington. And unfortunately, that kind of very purposeful, focused balance has been lacking at the African American.
Heard.
So,
Okay.
so I don't.
But
I'll steal from Bill Clinton, who, when talking about welfare reform, said, "Let's mend it, don't end it," and that's how I feel about the African American. And I suspect
yeah,
there are
but my
many in the Trump
problem
administration that feel the same way.
but that's not the only issue, and I hear you. That's just one piece of this executive order. I don't know if you read it. But this thing, I mean, it talked about how our museums are now essentially writing American history in a way that makes white people feel bad about themselves. And so we have to correct history. Like, it's bone chilling to think about correcting American history in a way that seems to kind of either mute or erase the African part of it. And that has to do with more than just the museum, because if you put it together with the cemetery and of course with the assault on DEI altogether, at least as you say, we are the face. I think my question to you is, especially as the chairman of CORE, are you all concerned about what seems to be an effort to mute the African part of American history, if not erase it?
Yeah, I don't acknowledge that that's what's going on here. What I will say is that there have been unbelievable excesses with DEI programs. Okay. Not all of them. I'm not going to say they're all uniformly excessive, but many of them have gone out of the way, not only to isolate. And, I remember seeing a class where a teacher was saying, all the white people raise your hand. And then they raised their hand and said, you have to know that you are born racist. Okay. No.
Good grief.
That is not history. That is not proper education.
Niger, I don't know where this class was, but how often does that actually happen? Give me a break.
Unfortunately, believe it or not, DEI has embedded itself, and some of the best aspects of DEI, but also some of the worst aspects of DEI and the excesses of DEI were firmly entrenched in many institutions of higher learning and many classrooms across the country. I mean, this what is it?
DEI was also about
the 1619 project, for example. The 1619 project, which many historians across the board have said, this is pablum. This is untrue ideological pablum dressed up as history, and it is not. But the 1619 Project, by the way, the
You
author
see
of
that?
which received a Pulitzer Prize, undeserved, quite frankly.
You have you read it?
I read parts of it, and parts of it are just totally make no sense. And it's more of an argument than it is history. History should not be an argument. And if you have an argument in history, you should at least go to some degree to have both sides. You know,
History is often an argument because none of us were actually there for it. But go ahead.
what I would say is this: that DEI, the example I gave you of the 1619 Project, went as far excessively as those who romanticize the Confederacy. There was a time when our history books were dominated by the Southern point of view that, oh, that little thing, slavery, was not the real issue of the Civil War. The real issue of the
Yeah.
Civil War was
And we
state
seem to be
supremacy.
drifting back toward that direction. You don't think?
No, no, not at all. I think quite contrary. What happened is in the 60s, you had the pendulum swing in the entire other direction. Okay. And the problem with pendulums is that sometimes they swing too far. And I think in this case, certain isolated excessive cases, the DEI pendulum swung too far in the other direction, not only in regards to race, but in regards to gender, in regards to sexual orientation, in regards to a number of different things. It just went too far.
Disability. Do you have any idea how much like DEI is applied to to disability issues? I mean, it's the fact that it's pictured as this thing that like gives black and brown people more inroads is just false. You said that yourself,
Yes,
that it's usually white women benefiting. So what are we talking about? Which one is it?
well, we get the blame for it and tend to disproportionately not get the benefits of it. Look, my father, Roy Innis, great civil rights champion, was one of the founding fathers of affirmative action. Okay,
Right.
but his vision of affirmative action in the mid 60s and early 70s was quite different than what is being masqueraded today as DEI program. And there needs to be a dramatic review and in many cases halting of what is going on in our country. Look, one of my favorite justices and people, period, is John Marshall Harlan. Okay, the Supreme Court justice that was the one dissenting opinion in the Plessy versus Ferguson segregation
Mm-hmm.
case, was
Yep.
codified segregation for nearly 100 years in the United States. Okay, closer to 50 than 100. But nevertheless, his dissent, and I'd ask you to read it again. You probably have already, but read it again. It
Mm-hmm.
will thrill you. I'd ask your listeners to look up the famous Harlan dissent because the fundamental line of it is he has no belief in the social equality of the races. But when it comes to the Constitution of the United States, the lowest of the low is equal to the highest of the high because we are all equal under the law. I
Yes.
I often call Martin Luther King Jr. the spiritual grandchild of Justice Harlan because his
Yes.
famous "I Have a Dream" speech says we need to judge by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And it's the
Yes. But
same
Niger.
line of thinking.
Niger.
And that's what we need
That's true,
reaffirmed.
but it still doesn't mean we all have the same opportunities, right?
No, but no, it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that when it comes to government, okay, and when it comes to the law, we should all be seen as equal below the law. The law should be colorblind, gender blind, sexual orientation blind, disability blind. That it should be that's a oxymoron.
Yes.
But when it comes to it, we should look at ourselves as Americans in the same pot. Okay, and I agree.
Yeah, the problem is that we don't, that discrimination exists, right?
It does exist, but what would you be shocked to know that Nigerian immigrants have a higher per capita income than whites in America?
No, I would not be shocked to know that at all. I had a couple of Nigerian professors when I was at UT. Yeah,
Well,
not at all.
there you go. And the fact of the matter is you have a number of black immigrant groups that come into our country that
Yeah, but this is an argument that's made a lot,
no,
Why can
but
immigrants do better?
you gotta recognize that there's something wrong with the analysis. That the analysis is not perfect. That blacks are disadvantaged when you have a situation where a element of black is actually more not equally successful, but more successful than the average white in the country.
Okay,
Obviously,
now you
the
want to talk about like so historical and sociological arguments. This is an entirely different show altogether because there's been a whole lot that, has been examined in terms of immigrant reception by the majority class versus blacks who were born here,
well,
blacks who are descendants of slaves. It's
as a
not the same.
proud Black American, I would agree with you. But I think a more sound analysis was something that Thomas Sowell wrote that I read right after I left Georgetown. It was called Ethnic America. And he goes through every major racial ethnic group in America, including Black Americans, including Caribbean Americans, et cetera,
Mhm.
including Irish, Polish, Jews. He goes through the entire, and what? He goes through an entire group and he talks about the socio-economic and cultural practices of some of these ethnic groups and how you will find commonality with the successful ethnic groups. And you'll also find commonality not just with Black Americans, but with other, some white, some Asian, some
Mhm.
Hispanic ethnic groups that have the same pattern that leads, unfortunately, to underperform. Whereas the successful groups have patterns of behavior that lead to success.
Okay,
So
that
I'm
sounds a
not
little bit
disregarding.
like if you're not successful, it's your own fault.
Well,
That sounds like
it
there's an
is saying
element of that in there.
it's saying that it's a little bit more complicated than it's just racism.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just racism. Of course not. Just that discrimination has not been eradicated by
No,
any
and
stretch of the imagination in the United
by the way, it's
States.
never going to be eradicated. Okay,
Right.
even at the point that blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians all love one another, guess what? We'll find some other reason to dislike that guy or girl. Okay, because they're wearing the wrong color today
Right.
or live in the
Fair
wrong
enough.
neighborhood. That unfortunately that is a part of the human condition. But what I would argue, okay, and I'm going to borrow from my father who said this to his dying day, that no country has gone through the transformation that the United States has gone through in regards to race, gender, et cetera, relatively peacefully than the United States of
Sure.
America. And we should
Relatively.
all be
Yep.
proud.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. One thing that we did not get to last time was that you were working last year on sounding the alarm about Iran's influence
Yes,
expanding from Yemen to Sudan.
yes.
You wrote an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post. You talked about Iran having control over both shores of the Red Sea and therefore enabling it to kind of disrupt maritime traffic. So I imagine that you were thrilled to hear about, the attack on the Houthis.
I was doing backflips in my room.
But
I
let's
was
just
thrilled.
I'm just going to cut straight to it though. Should somebody lose their job over the attack plans on Signal?
Yes, yes. Okay. Look, one of my colleagues on the Republican side compared this malfeasance on our end to the Biden administration's malfeasance in Afghanistan. And in
Afghanistan,
the
yeah.
case of Afghanistan, we lost 13 lives, American lives, and thousands of American allies that happen to be Afghani. So in
Right.
terms of measuring which one has more weight, and by the way, there was no firing, there were no
Yeah.
reprimands from the Biden administration.
I know, but Niger, please, I'm gonna go nuts if I have to hear this again
No, but I told
because
you,
that is always
I started with saying yes. Somebody needs to
okay.
be severely reprimanded. I mean, again, I say this not only as a proud patriotic American, I say this as a right wing Republican. What the hell was Jeffrey Goldberg included in this discussion? How the hell did that happen? Okay, I mean, it is disgusting. I am offended not as just
So
in
is
America.
anybody on Capitol Hill going to do something here?
Yeah, are
Is
there
it no?
not
Better
enough
yet, better
conservative
yet.
journalists out there that could have been included in something like this? That you got to go to Jeffrey Goldberg? You got to be kidding me!
Yeah,
You know. So I'm
but
just this one is
Niger.
easy. You gave me a softball here because yes, I do believe that somebody needs to be reprimanded and or fired.
Okay. Yeah, I said fired, but at the very least, how about the Attorney General having some kind of investigation? Like, you guys would be going crazy if this was a Democratic administration and there wasn't even an investigation going on at the Justice Department. I mean, come on.
Pam Bondi is a good person. I happen to know her. She's a good lawyer, and she's going to be a great attorney general. I hope that she takes up an investigation of this, what she might be doing very quietly, very much behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, at the end of the investigation that I believe is going to occur, if it hasn't even started already, yes, someone needs to be severely reprimanded, if not fired completely.
Okay. Awesome. What is CORE up to these days in the administration? Does CORE
No, we
have a role right now?
we have no formal role with the administration except for tangentially my role with TV Abraham and my program, which is Niger presents the Trump Revolution. But no, there's no formal relationship that we have with the administration. There could very well be one in the and you'll be the first one to hear it in the weeks and months to come. I think there are a number of places that people within the administration view that CORE could be helpful. So stay tuned.
Okay. So wait, is your show for you? Is that your project or is that a CORE project or
No, that
both?
is a Niger Innis project, but
Okay.
obviously, as its chairman, there's a little spillover effect.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck with that. And I thank you again for our part two.
Always a pleasure, TD. If for no other reason as I get to look at your face for an hour, your
Oh my
gorgeous
God.
face for an hour. Ladies and gentlemen,
I
Tanya
have to cut
Davis
that
is
out.
absolute evidence that black don't crack.
I got it on that note. All right, you. You have a good night.
You too, T. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.